This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Raw Deal, where I'm very pleased to have an exceptional guest today. His name, Christopher Bolin. He's done brilliant work on 9/11. He's much in demand as a speaker. He's published a book which is available at his website, Bolin, BOLLYN.com. You can find it there. In addition, he was a central figure in a brand new video produced by Mark Oliver entitled America, a Nation Deceived, which has been originally available on a community network station that's slightly obscure, but which only Damagard has now put on his own website. So remember that name, America, a Nation Deceived. You're going to find that fascinating, one of the best of the 9/11 videos. Christopher, I'm so pleased to have you on with me today here on The Raw Deal.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's nice to be with you.
Tell us about your travels. Tell us how you became drawn into 9/11 and more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was an investigative journalist working for a weekly paper in Washington, D.C. when 9/11 happened. And I was passing through New York City with my family very early that morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning through Manhattan when it, before all hell broke loose 6 hours later. And I was naturally drawn to the subject, obviously, because my specialty sort of had developed into investigating government cover-ups of mass atrocities. And with my background in the Middle East, particularly Israel and Palestine, it very quickly became the focus of my research on 9/11.
Yes. I think you've been particularly brilliant in exposing the Israeli connections, where I think we would agree 9/11 was brought to us compliments of the CIA, the neocons, and the Department of Defense, the overwhelming majority of whom are dual U.S.-Israeli citizens, and the Mossad. Absolutely fascinating stuff, Christopher. Tell us about, some of the specific findings of your research and how you substantiate your case.
Well, very early on, like in the first couple of days or so, it became very obvious that the government was giving us a prepared narrative about what had happened on September 11th. And information and evidence that contradicted that narrative was being omitted from any discussion. There was, for example, all of the eyewitness accounts of seeing and hearing explosions in the towers before and during the collapses. And then there was this interesting story about these Middle Eastern men who were seen on videotaping and photographing and clicking their lighters on the Jersey side of the river with the burning World Trade Center in the background. And it turned out that these 5 Middle Eastern men turned out to be Israelis, actually Israeli intelligence agents, 2 of them, and they were prepared to videotape and to monitor the attack before the first plane struck. They were positioned on the New Jersey side, and this was reported only very briefly in the new paper in Bergen, New Jersey, by a man named Paulo Lima. But it was never reported in New York, for example, across the river, or in the mainstream media in this country. So, these are the things when you see certain aspects of an atrocity like 9/11 being conspicuously omitted from the record, from the discussion in the mainstream media, then you realize something's going on, and there's a reason why that information is being omitted, and it's because it's too sensitive. It's not supposed to get out there. It's contradictory to the narrative. And that's where I began my research with what was being, taken out of the account. And, when you think about it, I know you've done a lot of work on the Kennedy assassination, maybe both of them. But I often say to myself, is this all? Are all of these big atrocities, are they all connected? Are they all being done by the same faction, by the same group? Or do we have competing factions? One doing maybe the murder of John Kennedy, one doing the murder of Bobby Kennedy, one doing the 9/11? Well, it really stands to reason that most likely this is one faction, one special group that is doing all of these things. And I think the most telling aspect of it is that they're all treated the same way by the media. Even today, the murder of Bobby Kennedy is coming up 50 years now. His son has come out and said that, it's been a cover-up and that there were two shooters. And I mean, we've known all this for a long, long time. But because Bobby Kennedy's saying it, it's getting into the Washington Post. It's being discussed. But still, the mainstream media pretends that none of this information, none of these facts matter. CBS, for example, owned by CBS News, which is run by the grandnephew of David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel. The guy Tony Dorkopel, he said Dorkopel, I think it's pronounced. He said at the end of a little spiel they had on Bobby Kennedy, he said, "Truth appears to be out of our reach concerning the murder of Bobby Kennedy." It's not that the truth is out of our reach. The facts have been presented. The problem is that the media has failed to embrace the facts, embrace the evidence. And this is exactly the same situation we're facing with 9/11. The evidence and the information about the truth of 9/11 has been out there for a long, long time. But the media has refused to embrace those facts or that evidence.
I think you're making excellent points, Christopher. Recently, I showed a panel of 100 executives from CNN, all 100 of whom were dual U.S. Israeli citizens. Another panel of 100 from NBC, all 100 were dual U.S. Israeli citizens. Another panel of 100 from the New York Times, all 100 were dual U.S. Israeli citizens. Wow. And when it comes to Bobby, the facts of the matter are rather cut and dry. If you consult the autopsy report by Thomas Noguchi, world-famous coroner, who discovered that Bobby had been shot 3 times, once behind the right ear from a distance of 1.5 inches, and twice as he was falling under the armpit, one bullet barely missing his heart, where he was shot at a 4th time, but it only passed through his jacket from behind. Sirhan, of course, was in front, emptied his 8-shot Smith & Wesson 22 caliber, but didn't hit Bobby at all. Right. The security guard standing beside him, Thane Eugene Caesar, however, had the same type of weapon. He was the assailant. He was holding Bobby by the left arm. As he fell, he grabbed at his tie, and his tie clasp is actually lying there on the pantry floor in various photographs, Christopher. Most people have no idea who it was. And just to make a further point in confirmation of your inferences and assertions, Sirhan, of course, just happened to be a Palestinian. Between the destruction of the second tower and of the first, they just happened to play footage showing Palestinians rejoicing as though it were contemporaneous reaction to what the world was witnessing on television, except that was a completely fabricated impression. The Palestinians were just as slack-jawed and stunned as the rest of the world. It was archival footage. They just happened to have it hand. And perhaps the world's largest audience to ever watch a live event on television. They played it from a distant religious or political event to show Palestinians rejoicing, and received, no doubt, a planted phone call claiming responsibility by Popular Front for the liberation of Palestine. Christopher, I find one aspect of these Israeli ops is they go a bridge too far in promoting their political agenda because they think the Americans are so dumb we aren't going to get it.
Yeah. But there's another thing is that, Sirhan was in the pantry for about 30 minutes prior to, and waiting there, quite conspicuous, asking people, the senator's going to come this way, isn't he? When there was, in fact, no plan for the senator to go through the pantry or the kitchen. That makes no sense. The senator was, Bobby Kennedy was probably going to go out through the lobby and go to a press conference.
Yes.
But he was, from what I've found, he was convinced, he was turned around by his press secretary, Frank Mankiewicz.
Yes.
And Frank Mankiewicz, told him, according to some reports, insisted that Bobby turn around and go through the pantry. Now, this is very important. And so that, Sirhan's waiting in the pantry for the senator to come through, which is not part of the plan. And then and Frank Mankiewicz was the former civil rights director for the B'nai B'rith ADL, Anti-Defamation League on the West Coast. So he's connected to this Zionist cabal at the highest level. And so Frank Mankiewicz, he went on to become, I think, the founding chief of National Public Radio. But then you say to yourself, well, this choreography whereby, Sirhan is waiting in the pantry, and that, Frank Mankiewicz happens to push the senator through the pantry to go, through the kitchen, making no sense. This choreography indicates that somebody, some hidden hand has control over the whole hotel. So I was concerned, who owned the hotel? And lo and behold, I found out that the hotel was owned by the father-in-law of Lester Crown, of the Henry Crown family of Chicago. And this is important in my mind, because you find Henry Crown, the Henry Crown family of Chicago, involved in the cover-up of the John Kennedy murder. Henry Crown's personal lawyer, a man named Albert Jenner, was the legal counsel who was sent to the Warren Commission to determine if there had been any conspiracy behind the actions of Lee Harvey Oswald or Jack Ruby. Of course, he found none. Then you have, Henry Crown's, Lester Crown, his son, his father-in-law, owning the hotel in L.A., the Ambassador Hotel, where Bobby Kennedy shot. He also owned the hotel in Florida where J. Edgar Hoover used to go with his boyfriend. And then thirdly, this is where I found this connection most interesting, is these two characters in Chicago who were like the initial cover-up people of the 9/11 attacks. Gene Corley, he was the person behind the FEMA documents, the big white papers that were done about the destruction of the World Trade Center, FEMA, and also the American Society of Civil Engineers. He oversaw that document, the production of that document. And then there was a guy named Zdenek Bazant from Northwestern University who penned a paper on September 12th saying that the buildings fell down because the jet fuel heated up the trusses, and it's all explainable by burning jet fuel. And this became the paper that other people were able to hang their hat on and say, yes, the buildings fell because of burning jet fuel. Both of these men, Gene Corley and Zdenek Bazant, are minions of the Henry Crown family. The Zdenek Bazant works at the engineering department at Northwestern University, which is heavily sponsored by Henry Crown family. And Mr. Gene Corley was also a recipient of a Henry Crown Award for his work with concrete and the American Concrete Association. And I thought that was very strange that here you have this one family from Chicago, and the Henry Crown family is not very well understood by many people, and their role in the creation of the State of Israel. For example, they own Aspen Mountain, they own the Aspen Institute, but Lester Crown spoke out there a couple of years ago and told the assembled people in Aspen how his father had broken the Neutrality Act back in 1950 or 52 and disassembled an entire airplane manufacturing plant in the United States and sent it to Israel in violation of this act to prevent arming either side. And that became Israeli Aircraft Industries. He was the founder. He was the person who gave them their first factory. And that this one family from Chicago is like a red thread that runs through both assassinations of the Kennedy brothers and 9/11 is either an amazing coincidence or it's the telltale thread.
Yes. What's the probability you would have all of these involvements if it were not the case that there were this common cause and that they were instrumental in each of these events? Another
thing is that the Ambassador Hotel that Mayor Schein owned in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, that used to be the hangout where Mickey Cohen used to run his casino operation, his gambling operation in that hotel. And Mickey Cohen was sent to Alcatraz Island in 1961 by none other than Attorney General Bobby Kennedy. And so, Bobby Kennedy was stepping on the toes of the Jewish mob in a very big way, and that he would go have his event in that hotel. He probably didn't know the history of the hotel, But that, I think that that this is the hidden hand behind the whole thing.
Well, that Mankiewicz led him, diverted him from the planned exit through the grand ballroom, yes, to the press conference as you described, is so very telling. I mean, my God, and your point is impeccable about Sirhan being there asking about the senator coming through when there was no plan in existence for him to come through, that was yet to materialize.
Right.
Sirhan was subjected to a hypnosis by a psychiatrist who subsequently boasted that he had hypnotized Sirhan for the CIA, Christopher. And as I'm sure you're well aware, when the conflict between the police report, which blamed Sirhan, who couldn't possibly have fired shots from behind when he was in front, an interesting parallel to the reports we had of the shooting of JFK that were being reported on the scene as the evidence was coming in, for example, by NBC, of a shot to the throat. It actually passed through the windshield, and of a second shot to the right forehead, causing Frank McGee, who was nobody's fool, as the story became coming in, that the shooter had been above and behind. He says, this is incredulous. How can the man have been shot from in front, from behind? Then we get a parallel with Bobby. And when there's a conflict between the official police report of the shooter having been in front and the coroner's report of him having been to the side or behind, they fired the coroner, Christopher. It's unbelievable. Yeah. This shows the power of the LAPD at the time.
Yeah. It's, when you read about how the LAPD investigation was corrupted, and about how the Sirhan's defense was corrupted, that's all understood in this secrets and secret societies that control these operations, and these corruption on the part of his defense attorney, what have you. But when you have the media, when you have the LA Times and the papers of the United States, for 50 years now, refusing to acknowledge the evidence that disproves that Sirhan was the murderer. It's very similar, as you said. It's very similar to Dallas, Texas, in the way that they had the kill zone, they put their patsy in place, they put their assailant, the real assailants, in place, and then when the candidate or when the president entered the kill zone, they went wild. They went and did what they had to do. But what I wonder is that if this Mr. Cesar was really the assailant, the one that actually did the killing from behind. I wonder, did he realize what danger he was in? Because he was standing right behind Bobby, and he's being shot at from in front by Sirhan. I mean, Mr. Schrady got hit by a bullet in his head, right behind Bobby. This assailant, the person who actually shot Bobby from behind, must have had pretty strong nerves, or maybe a very strong bulletproof vest or something to be so willing to go into such a shooting melee and putting his own life at risk.
That's an interesting observation, because a similar question has been raised about Roy Kellerman, the agent in charge in the passenger seat, and William Greer, the driver, where they moved the president's military aide, who normally would have been sitting in between them, to the last vehicle in the motorcade along with the president's personal physician, so there'd be maximal complications if the president were to be in need of emergency assistance, because the shot that actually is fired from inside the triple underpass that passed through the windshield would have hit the military aide had he been in his normal position. And it meant, of course, that Greer and Kellerman were prepared. I mean, they were showing, great resilience to recognize a bullet would be passed through the windshield by a very expert shot to hit JFK. Very much as you describe here with the security guard who actually appears to have been the shooter of Bobby.
Yeah. Well, you see, that's the thing, is that, we've talked about these similarities and these things that are in common with all three of these crimes, and it's like the Bobby Kennedy murder is very similar to the John F. Kennedy murder. And when you see the same people involved, the hallmarks, the fingerprints, the names of the same people involved in all three cover-ups, JFK, RFK, and 9/11, you have to say, like, is this the tip of the iceberg of a real James Bond type Spectre organization that has complete control, and we don't know about it, and they control the media, they control the courts, they control the Henry Crown family. They own General Dynamics. You know, they're one of the biggest defense contractors, and so they had an interest in keeping the Vietnam War conflict going. They had an interest but they're very strong Zionists, as I said, and so they're serving the Zionist cause, the state of Israel, and whatever you know the people in the administration or the leaders of Israel think is necessary, they do.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important you're characterizing here. I've identified 6 of the shooters in Dealey Plaza. There was at least a 7th whose identity appears known. There may have even been an 8th. Jack himself was hit 4 different times in the throat from in front, in the back from behind, twice, or even David Mandick, who's a leading expert on the medical evidence, believes a 3rd time in the head, once from behind, and then the shots to the head occurred after the driver pulled the limousine to the left and to a halt to make sure he'd be killed, which, of course, was such a conspicuous indication of Secret Service complicity in setting him up for the hit. It had to be removed. But there were many, many of those. They reorganized the motorcade sequence, for example, put the presidential limo out front when it ought to have been in the middle, preceded by a flatbed truck that was canceled. 110th Military Intelligence Unit should have been distributed through the city for security. It was ordered to stand down over the adamant opposition of its commanding officer. JFK was overwhelmingly more complex, and the cover-up very elaborate. But you make some key points, I think, about commonalities in threads in potential motivation here, Christopher.
Here's another one. You know, I told you that Mickey Cohen, he was the crime boss.
Christopher, hold that thought. Hold that thought. We'll be right back with my special guest, Christopher Bolin. We'll be right back. Bolin, his website, Bolin, BOLLYN.com. You can obtain his book, 9/11,
Solving 9/11.
Already for Solving 9/11, the deception that changed the world, on his website. He does brilliant work. He's feted all around the world, flown to give talks about 9/11. I'm so delighted to have him here today. For those anticipating, yes, we will be taking calls during the second hour. I'll bring out the phone number. Christopher, you were talking about Mickey Cohen.
Yeah. Well, Mickey Cohen was a big time, you know, numbers guy, racket, casino stuff, and he was operating out of that hotel, Ambassador Hotel, in the late 1940s, and that's the same time that he was befriended with Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin had to leave Palestine and Israel at the time because of his terrorist activities, and he came to the United States and became friends with Mickey Cohen. A few years later, Bobby Kennedy sent Mickey Cohen to Alcatraz Island for tax evasion, I think it was, in '61. And Mickey Cohen was bailed out, the only prisoner ever bailed out of Alcatraz Island, and his bond was signed by Earl Warren, Chief Justice Earl Warren. And I find that just absolutely amazing that you know these people like Earl Warren, they weave through this like as a thread as well. Because why would Earl Warren, you know, why would they be bailing out Mickey Cohen? He's really notorious scumbag of a gangster.
Yeah, that's incredible. That is simply incredible. And of course, we know Earl Warren was manipulated by LBJ to head the Warren Commission, which was an absurdity in and of itself, because had it actually succeeded in identifying culprits, they would have entered the legal system, presumably been prosecuted. The case would eventually have come up before the Supreme Court, whose Chief Justice had been compromised by his prior involvement in the investigation. But Lyndon, being the master politician he was, knew that there would be great credibility in the report if the Chief Justice, in whom the people had tremendous confidence, were to be its head.
Yes, and you know, the Warren Commission was the the model that they used for 9/11, that they assembled a commission, a politically appointed commission, albeit a year and a half later, and they produced the same sort of completely flawed document in which they dealt with only part of the conflict or part of the incident and constrained in time and scope, and produced a completely flawed mythical document.
Your use of that word reminds me, Philip Zelikow, who became the executive director after Henry Kissinger was just too much of an obvious cover-up artist to actually serve, was rejected, had as his area of academic specialization before he entered government the creation and maintenance of public myths, MYTHS, and of course that's exactly what he gave us. In fact, Christopher, no doubt you're aware he had completed a draft of the 9/11 Commission report a year before he shared it with the other members of his staff. In fact, I am personally convinced that it was he who drafted the script for the whole 9/11 scenario. Who better to do it than someone who's an expert in the creation and maintenance of public myths?
Yeah. Well, he's the author. He probably had some help from behind the scenes, in crafting and putting things together. I have found in my research about 9/11 all of the hallmarks of an Israeli Zionist criminal operation, and as I said, it appears to have been the same hallmarks are seen in both Kennedy murders as well. So it's like, I'm beginning to think that Ian Fleming was right about this huge criminal enterprise like Spectre, I think he called it. It seeks global control. It seeks absolute global control. And what were those Zionist neocons? What are they all about anyway? They're about total spectrum dominance. Isn't that what they call it? Controlling the whole planet with on all of its levels. Cyberspace and physical levels. It's a psychopathic vision they have of the world, but it's not far from what James Bond was writing about.
Yes.
Ian Fleming was what James Bond was fighting, right?
Yes. No, I'm a huge fan of Bond and all that. Yes. No, I think you're making great points.
And another thing, Henry Crown produced the first 2 or 3 Bond films. I thought that's very interesting. Why did Henry Crown, go in? Because it's the same reason why they crafted, Sidney Korshak, the big Jewish lawyer from Chicago who ran Hollywood. He crafted the Godfather piece. They want to make sure that it's presented in the right way, so that like when they made the Godfather movie, Sidney Korshak, who is Tom, the consigliere, the lawyer, he is the lawyer for the mob. In the movie, he's presented as being an Irish German.
Yeah. Played by Robert Duvall, of course.
Yeah, exactly. When in fact he's a Lithuanian Jewish guy from west side of Chicago.
Love it, Christopher.
In reality, Sidney Korshak was the guy that ran Hollywood. He was the lawyer that ran all the movies, all the whole thing, and he was the advisor to. He's the guy that got Al Pacino the role. He was the big, litigator. He was the guy that managed all these things, and he made sure that Robert Duvall played his role, and that his nationality was concealed by being an Irish German, which he was not.
Very clever. Very clever.
Yeah. Because they want Americans to think, they want the world to think that this organized criminal syndicate in the United States is the mafia. It's not. I'm from Chicago. We never called it the mafia in Chicago. They always called it the criminal syndicate. The criminal syndicate is multi-ethnic, and it has a very strong Jewish component, Italian component, Irish component. But in Chicago, they never call it the mafia. It's the crime syndicate, and the lawyer for the crime syndicate was Sidney Korshak. His brother, who lived in Chicago, ran the city of Chicago.
Fascinating. Yeah. Well, and of course, JFK was at loggerheads with David Ben-Gurion over Israel's desire to develop nuclear weapons, which he opposed. And yes. Ben-Gurion resigned in disgust with, and I'm sure you can elaborate on this, some suspect instructions to the Mossad to participate in taking out JFK.
Yes. I'm familiar with the thesis, Michael Piper's thesis, and I think that it has a lot of merit. I definitely think so. And David Ben-Gurion, as the first prime minister of Israel, also was the person who asked Henry Crown through Teddy Kollek, who was the arms procurer in New York, to get an airplane manufacturing plant to Israel so they could make planes. And that's what Henry Crown did for David Ben-Gurion. And then Al Schwimmer went over there from California and ran the thing, and it became Israel Aircraft Industries. And I mean, this is the arming of the state of Israel. And what you see when you read the Zionist history about the arming of the state of Israel, you find that it is the organized Jewish mafia mob in Chicago, in the United States, working hand in glove with people like Menachem Begin and David Ben-Gurion, etc. So it's like the Israeli or the Jewish mob in the United States is arm in arm, hand in hand with the creation of the state of Israel, with people like Shimon Peres and Ben-Gurion, as I said, and all of them. And like in 2001, what was it? Bill Clinton pardoned half of them, a lot of them. People like Al Schwimmer and Goldspun, they all got pardoned by Bill Clinton.
And as you well know, Larry Silverstein, who took control of the World Trade Center just 6 weeks before the event, has regular phone calls every Sunday, I understand, with Bibi Netanyahu. I mean, they are super tight. And the whole event, of course, was orchestrated to create a pseudo-justification for the United States to become involved in all these wars in the Middle East, to take out the modern Arab states that serve as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region, and eventually to confront the Persian nation of Iran. It hasn't played out that way because of the intervention of Russia and Iran at the request of the Syrian government, but not for lack of trying. And they aren't done yet.
That's exactly right. That's my latest book is called The War on Terror: The Plot to Rule Middle East, and that's like the like the icing on the cake of my solving 9/11 research is that 9/11 was done for a reason. 9/11 was a military operation disguised as a terrorist attack. It was done, very highly sophisticated, using very highly sophisticated explosives and technologies. Computer hacking of the military computers, the federal computers, all of this. It was extremely sophisticated, and it required decades of planning, and it required a great deal of infiltration of the U.S. military and federal government, which was the Israelis do have, and that's how it was all set up. But it was done for a reason. They didn't do it just to make us mad at Arabs, and no, it was done in order to kickstart this War on Terror, which was an Israeli design that was a doctrine that was rolled out in Jerusalem in 1979 by Benjamin Netanyahu and Menachem Begin at the Netanyahu Institute in July 4th, 5th, and 6th, I think it was, in 1979. And George Herbert Walker Bush spoke there. He was a candidate for office at the time. And this became the War on Terror. But in order for the War on Terror to go forward, like you said, to break up the Arab states, to break up the secular Arab states, to fragment the Middle East like they did Yugoslavia, in order to get the United States to do that, there had to be something in the United States like the new Pearl Harbor. And that's what everything depended on. And so 9/11 is the keystone to this entire construct. The construct was made, they had to put the keystone in place, and 9/11 was the keystone.
Yes, we're in complete agreement. And of course, he would publish a book, Terrorism, How the West Can Win, in, as I recall, 1987, before the concept of terrorism had taken hold in the West.
Yeah, well, after the first conference in 1979, he put together speeches in a book called International Terrorism, Challenge and Response. Then I think in 1984, there was another conference by that same Netanyahu group in Virginia, Chantilly, Virginia, or Arlington, in D.C. in any case. And that became the next book that you talked about, Terrorism, How the West Can Win, or Fighting Terrorism. And so he produced like three or four books. But this became Netanyahu's complete spiel. This was his career during the 1980s. He was constantly pushing this notion that the Western democracies led by the United States of America had to come to the Middle East and fight off Arab terrorism that was plaguing Israel, because he said Israel is attacked by Arab terrorists only because we're a Western nation. These Arabs can't stand our Western freedoms and our Western values. So therefore, the real target is the West. Therefore, it's the West. It's your problem. You come and fight these guys. And it's a sleight of hand. And
so it appears when George Bush said that they hate our freedom, he was giving a speech written by Bibi Netanyahu.
Yes.
I mean,
yes,
literal. Yes. God.
And you have the very first in such an event like 9/11. There's something called the primacy effect, and that's the first plausible explanation that's given to the public to explain something horrific is the one that is most deeply etched in their mind.
Yeah.
And that was done by Ehud Barak, who appeared on the BBC television and Sky Television in London, just after the towers had fallen. The dust had not settled yet. This was still, morning in New York. And he was on BBC World telling the world will never be the same from now on. He speaks with a very thick Israeli accent. He said that,
yes,
we know who did this. This is Osama bin Laden, and we know where he is. He said now is the time for the United States to lead an operational, concrete war against terrorism. And that's what this is all about. And they snookered the United States into waging war against Israel's enemies for it. This is why we are in Syria. This is why the United States is still occupying half of Syria. We are occupying almost a half of the country of Syria, the entire eastern third from the Euphrates River to the Iraqi border, and then part in the south and some parts in the north. And it's like, why are we there? Well, the ostensible excuse is that we're fighting terrorism, we're fighting ISIS. This is all Operation Inherent Resolve. But in fact, we're there, and we've been there since 2012, as Hillary Clinton said, to help Israel. She wrote in that leaked email, the best way to help Israel to counter, Iran's designs is to use force to overthrow the government of Syria. And that's where we still are. Under Obama, we were spending $1 billion a year through the CIA to wage this war. So basically, all of our operations in the Middle East are being directed by Israel.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson had a senator from the South on recently, and he asked him. He said, Senator, I can't figure out what is the United States doing in Syria? I mean, what is our interest? Not to mention, Christopher, that Syria is a constitutional republic, that Bashar al-Assad is a democratically elected president of Syria who enjoys more support from the Syrian people, about 80%, than do any recent incumbents of the United States presidency. And the senator said, well, if you're a friend of Israel, and Tucker called him out, I said, no, Senator, I'm not talking about Israel's interests. I'm talking about the United States. Why should the United States be there? He had no answer because, of course, it's all to benefit Israel. So we're wasting our national treasury, our young men, our young women, wreaking havoc throughout the Middle East. It's all for Israel.
Right. And it's extremely counterproductive, as you said, very expensive. And it's become America's longest war and most expensive war. And it's all based on deception. And that's why my Solving 9/11 books are important, because I unveil the deception behind 9/11, make that very clear, and who's behind it. And then the War on Terror book explains why we've been deceived. We were deceived for a purpose. And that's why the media in this country still protects the official narrative of 9/11, because that narrative is the narrative that is the war is based upon. And contradictory evidence doesn't mean anything to these people. The same thing, like the bullet wounds to Bobby Kennedy from the back that disprove that Sirhan could have been the killer of Bobby Kennedy, don't matter to the media. It's like, hey, we've got our our Sirhan media narrative set up here, and that's all for 50 years. But how can a country be deceived about such a fundamental thing for 50 years?
No, I know. You make such excellent points. And, of course, Osama bin Laden he was our man in Afghanistan. He was instrumental in getting the Stinger missiles into the hands of the Mujahideen. They used to shoot down the Soviet helicopters and tanks and drove them out. He was an officer of the CIA. He was Colonel Tim Osmond of the CIA. In fact, a CIA official visited him in a hospital in Dubai where he was suffering, these various medical maladies, including problems with his kidney shortly before his death in Afghanistan on 15 December 2001, where he was buried in an unmarked grave in accordance with Muslim traditions. There were local obituaries. Even CNN and Fox News picked up on the 26th of December 2001 and published that Osama bin Laden was dead. But it would take the New York Times 6 months before they'd get around to mentioning it in a kind of tucked away in a column about how bin Ladenism is dead, mentioning in the first paragraph that Osama appears to have died 6 months ago, where, of course, it was politically expedient for this Barack Obama guy to resurrect him and have him die again in a fabricated raid in a compound. I mean, Christopher, the American people have been played so badly over 9/11. It's enough to make you want to vomit.
Well, the thing is, another interesting thing about that Osama bin Laden is that he was one of the first Afghan Arabs to go up into Pakistan and be trained by Israeli military intelligence under Ehud Barak in 1983 through 1985. In 1984, that's when Osama became very close to Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was the head of this group called Hezb Islami, Party of Islam. And this was the group that the United States was arming with Saudi money and CIA money. And the people who were actually doing the training in terrorism and weapons were Israeli military intelligence agents working under Ehud Barak. And this is not widely known, but this is the group that became Taliban and Al-Qaeda. The Afghan Arabs, the Arab-speaking guys from the Gulf that had gone to help in the jihad, they became Al-Qaeda in 1994 when they lost support from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And the Afghan guys, the Pashtun guys, they went over and they merged with Taliban. So it's like all of this has been crafted and set up and choreographed by Israeli military intelligence with the help of Saudi Arabia and the CIA from the early 1980s in Pakistan. This is all part of a very sick show, a very sick play.
And, of course, if they can't pin the tail on Palestinians, which was frankly absurd. I mean, every serious analyst agrees there were only two agencies in the world that could have pulled off 9/11, the CIA and the Mossad. And on that date, they were operating in collaboration. So now you have this complete absurdity of blaming Iran for responsibility in 9/11. Christopher, have you heard anything more absurd than that?
Yeah, well, I mean, they do that all the time in New York courts. They lay the blame on Saudi Arabia or Iran and say that you owe us like $6 million, $6 billion, $1 trillion, whatever it is. But they're not able to collect on it. But it of course is it's bizarre. And it's more of the same stupid show on the American people. The American people need the truth. The American people need the truth about what happened on 9/11, what happened to Bobby Kennedy, and what happened to John Kennedy. And you see, the only way we can extract ourselves from this mess is to get some truth. And that's what I've been trying to do with my work. I try to disabuse Americans of the deception that's been imposed on us. That's why when this Bobby Kennedy thing comes up, Bobby Kennedy was killed on the 1-year anniversary of the beginning of the 6-Day War. The 6-Day War began on June 5th, 1967, and Bobby was killed. Of course, he was shot on the 5th of June, 1968, 1 year later to the day.
Died the following morning. Yeah.
Yes.
Chris, to me, this Iran thing has a potential to backfire, just as Mueller. Indicting 13 Russians and 3 Russian companies for involvement in 9/11 is having his bluff called because they've hired a prestigious law firm. They have pled not guilty and they're seeking a speedy trial, which ironically Mueller is resisting because, of course, He doesn't have the evidence to produce it. In fact, he turned in 2 terabytes of material that was all in Russian that was supposed to be evidence. I mean, how could the Russians be interfering with our election with information in Russian? I mean, the absurdity of it is manifest. I believe Iran has a potential here of responding to this absurd lawsuit by seeking to defend itself, getting in and gaining discovery, just as the Russians are going after discovery through their representatives and blow apart the whole 9/11 charade.
Oh, that would be wonderful. That would really be wonderful. I'd like to see that something like that happen, but well, we'll see. But
the way the courts are managed, I agree. Yes. I mean, Hellerstein in New York, who of course just happens to be a Zionist himself, is controlling the 9/11 lawsuits and suffocating, stifling, denying. I mean, they're controlling the system from top to end and playing it all for their own benefit.
Yes. I always say that there are 3 aspects of a false flag terror attack or a false flag attack, even like the Kennedy murders. It has to be strictly managed very tightly. The investigation and access to the evidence has to be controlled very tightly. The interpretation of the event, how it's interpreted to the people, media, that's very tightly controlled. There's been no discussion of 9/11 truth in American media in 16 years. And thirdly, the litigation. They're the courts and the process. Like, that I don't know how many people realize that there were 3,000 fatalities on 9/11. That means that there are 3,000 families that had wrongful deaths cases that were that they had standing in, and not a single one of those wrongful death cases ever went to court. Not a single one of 3,000 people in the most litigious nation in the world. Not a single case ever went to court. They were all settled out of court.
Yeah, and of course the number was designed to approximate the deaths at Pearl Harbor, and they began talking about, the new Pearl Harbor idea was planted already by Project for a New American Century, which was, use the camouflage that this would a way to create a new American empire that would endure for the next 100 years would be if the U.S. were to move aggressively into the Middle East and exert military and diplomatic pressure outward from that geopolitically sensitive region. But it had nothing to do with American empire. We've already got too much of an empire. We're already overladen with, we've got too many long supply lines. We're collapsing like the Holy Roman Empire from the burden of our sustaining these numerous wars. It was all just a fig leaf to conceal that it was not of, by, and for Israel.
Right. Exactly right. Exactly right. That's exactly what's been going on. And that's where people don't understand. They don't see the hand behind that's controlling this whole operation. There's no, like you said, there's no American interest in Afghanistan or Syria or Iraq. None. So why are we spending, we're spending something like $100 million a day in Afghanistan. It's $4 million an hour we've been spending there for like 16 years. Yep. And the war in Iraq of course actually began in 1991 January. So it's been going on for 27 years now or something like that. It's incredible. We become absolutely mired in these expensive conflicts, and as you said, they're taking the food off of our table. They are really costing the American people a hell of a lot of money. And
the only caveat I would add is that American companies like Halliburton have been exploiting the situation for the oil resources in Afghanistan after the mineral wealth, including one of the world's largest supplies of lithium used in the construction of computer components, triggers for nuclear weapons, and electric car batteries, and of course protecting the poppy crop. We'll be right back with Christopher Bolin after this break, and the number to call in 715-245-5975. 715-245-5975. Take your phone. My very special guest, even extraordinary, Christopher Bolin. May I say that as the founder of Scholars for 9/11 Truth, who has done a huge amount of research on 9/11, I have complete admiration for Christopher. He's been carrying a lot of the heavy water out there, especially regarding the politics of 9/11. My own work has been focused more on the science, but you cannot understand the official, the story at all, or what's happened to us on that occasion without grasping the narrative, where I fault the two major alternatives to, a scientific approach, Judy Wood and Dews on the one hand, and Richard Gate and architects and engineers on the other, because they both give inadequate accounts of how it was done, and neither is willing to address the crucial question of who is responsible and why, where Christopher is making such an important difference. I want to reiterate that this new film, America, a Nation Deceived, is not only available now on Ole Damagard's website, but it's just been put up by Gus on 153news.net, 153news.net. It's a wonderful, wonderful film, and it gives a central place to Christopher for his efforts in exposing the culprits, the plan behind the event, where, frankly, to hear that Building 7 was a classic controlled demolition, it is interesting but esoteric if you don't understand where it fit into the broader scheme of things, where Christopher has been doing such very brilliant work. We do have a caller now from the 704 area. I will bring him in now. I have more questions for Christopher, and I'm sure others will want to call in as well. 705, you're on the 704, you're on the air. Please give us your name and speak to us.
Yes, Dr. Fetzer, I appreciate you taking my call. Hello to Christopher Bolin. I've never had the honor of speaking with you. First heard your name, came across it on the internet probably in the last days of 2005 and 2006. But yeah, by the way, this is Frank in North Carolina. I had a couple questions. It's so interesting to me, it's so frustrating to see how some of the, the self-appointed or, like gurus of 9/11, the tip of the spear on 9/11, Truth, the father of the 9/11 Truth movement, different people out there have become some of the most ardent supporters and defenders and deflectors of Israel and any Israeli participation or role in the 9/11 attacks. And to me, it's just beyond frustrating. It's been maddening for me. I've been on all over radio shows for like the last 12 years trying to wake people up on that, and I've not had any luck. And one other question, you mentioned the Godfather movie and the character played by Robert Duvall, the actor, the attorney, and also the Ian Fleming novels and the James Bond movies. You said that the one of the early producers of the Bond movies was this Jewish guy,
Henry Crown. Henry Crown.
Henry Crown. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that. But now, what about Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman?
Yeah, Henry Crown came into the first couple movies, I think the first 2 or 3 movies, and was probably the main money guy. And he worked with Broccoli. He worked with Broccoli on those first 2 films, I think. But he was executive producer.
Okay. And I also had this little personal theory, conspiracy theory, and there's probably nothing to it, that maybe one of the reasons that maybe Ian Fleming produced those novels in the first place was to somehow, in the minds of Americans, tie British intelligence with American patriotism and, to sort of create this idea in the minds of America, hey, look, these are our British cousins, the British intelligence, they're going to be doing all they're doing and will continue to do all of this espionage and all this different stuff over the world, and they're just one of us, and then just look the other way because it's all good and they're heroes and they stand up for the same values we do. And there's probably nothing to it, but I just thought it was plausible since it became such a phenomenon.
Well, it's a good question. The first part is that when we talk about Israel, in their involvement in 9/11 or these other murders or things like that, we're not talking about the state, really. We're not even talking about the government. We're talking about a very small group of people, most of their names we don't know, who are operating, in the case of 9/11, something called Israeli Military Intelligence. Its acronym is AMAN, Aman. And it is the largest intelligence apparatus in Israel. Mossad gets all the credit because they're the foreign, they're the written books about Mossad. But it's 9/11 was not a Mossad operation so much as it was a military operation. It required a lot of military planning, and the skills required were military skills. Apart from the usual deception. And, there are some very good books about Israeli intelligence written in English, books by Ostrovsky, for example, who wrote Deception by Way of Deception and Beyond Deception and The Lion of Judah. Very good books. And he explains a lot about how they carry these things off, how these things are done. And in relation to 9/11, a very good book written by a British author named John Le Carré is a book called The Little Drummer Girl. And I recommend people to read that book to understand how the trail was left for the hijackers in Florida and across the United States, so that they understand how Israel lays behind this deceptive trail of evidence that is meant to be picked up and analyzed, and to implicate the Arab or the Palestinian in terrorism that he has nothing to do with. And that's what The Little Drummer Girl is all about. The book is better than the movie because the book explains how it all goes. And the Mossad guy in the book tells the actress, he tells her, terror is theater. Theater's a con trick. Do you know what that is, a con trick? You've been deceived. And that's what's been going on in our country for a long, long time. The American people have been deceived about these things, and our media is completely supine. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't investigate anything. It's amazing that the U.S. media is quick to blame everything on Vladimir Putin. No matter what happens with the Skripal poisoning or something happens in Ukraine or whatnot, they blame without any evidence whatsoever. They put the blame on Assad or Putin. But when you have exculpatory evidence that's as clear as the nose on your face, like in the case of Sirhan or John F. Kennedy or 9/11, the media won't touch it. They won't go near any evidence that disproves the official version. And that's really a very, very significant failure in our country today, that we don't have a free media. We have the most tightly controlled media in the world.
I think those are great points, Christopher, and that your background as a journalist has put you in a distinctive position in analyzing what's going on and the way in which the published story, which is being promoted by the mainstream, can be so grossly in contradiction with the even readily available evidence. I mean, it is so blatant in these cases. Let me just follow up a bit about, the observation of Lenin that the best way to control the opposition is to lead it. My own opinion is that both architects and engineers, which has done good work vis-a-vis Building 7, but not a lot beyond that, and Judy Wood and Dews, is that they really are both intended by construction to be limited hangouts. Here's a personal experience I had with Judy Wood and Dews. A fellow by the name of Thomas Potter, who's a PR, a promoter of Judy Wood, they attack me all the time, sent an elaborate attack, and it had copies to about 10. So I fashioned a rebuttal and did a reply all, and one bounced, and the one that bounced came from the ADL, which Judy's Jewish, Richard Gage is Jewish. I don't thereby mean to imply that this is a Jewish phenomenon per se. Just as you have observed, there are good Jews and bad Jews. It's a relatively small group, including the Likudniks, who are professionals at terrorism and acts of false flag fakery, who appear to be playing the key roles here. But I am very suspicious when, we have a massive amount of evidence about all these matters, and neither Judy nor Gage will talk about who was responsible and why, which means, of course, the American people can't see any reason to wrap their minds around anything they're saying because they don't have a context, a political narrative within which they can locate and secure it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I understand that. I don't know about Judy Wood that much, but I know that Richard Gage wants to stay within his specialty, within his field, because when you go out of your field and you start giving opinions on things that you're not that familiar with or that are political, you're likely to get hit and to break the ice. Like that's what happened to out in Utah. There was Professor Stephen Jones who did work on discover some nanothermite in the dust and analyze the dust. When he was put on National Public Radio in Utah, and they interrogated him, in the first 20 minutes to find out, and they asked him, "So who did it though? Who did it? Who did it?" This Fabrizio Fazio did that, and Professor Jones finally said, well, from what he understood, from having heard people like Webster Tarpley, was that the international banking cartel was interested in getting control of Middle Eastern countries that they had lost control of, like Iran. And when he used the word international banking cartel, that was used against him. And they said that the first caller that called into the radio show on NPR in Utah that day was the head of the Jewish Federation of Utah, I think his name Tumpowski. And he said that when Professor Jones uses the word international banking cartel, he's speaking in code. And what he really means is the Jews. And therefore, based on that logic, what he was saying was anti-Semitic. And the next day, Professor Jones was suspended from teaching at BYU, a Mormon school. So, they're able to do that. So that's why Stephen Jones, why Richard Gage probably doesn't want to get into the politics of it because.
Well, Christopher, remember when I created Scholars, I invited Stephen Jones to be my co-chair at the recommendation of David Ray Griffin. And,
oh yes.
Yeah, and we eventually had a falling out because of his preoccupation over nanothermite, which I was convinced couldn't possibly be responsible for blowing the buildings apart, converting them into millions of cubic yards of very fine dust, leaving no residue in their footprints, completely unlike Building 7. You have all the floors coming down at the same time, and you got a pile of debris. 5.5 floors equal to 12% of the original height of 47, which is typical of experience with classic controlled demolitions. T. Mark Hightower, who's a chemical engineer, and I would publish 3 articles about the limitations of nanothermite, which has very feeble explosive force, like 1/13 the power of TNT. So you've been better off using TNT. In fact, there's a great deal of evidence that it was done using a sophisticated arrangement of mini or micro nukes. Even the U.S. Geological Survey, for example, did dust sample studies from 35 locations in New York, unlike Stephen's focus on a couple of samples from an apartment there, and discovered a host of elements, barium, strontium, lithium, lanthanum, tritium, some of which only exist in radioactive form, that in their quantities and correlations was indicative of a nuclear event. In fact, transforming materials into very fine dust, as happened here in New York, is a signature of the use of nuclear weapons. Stephen hasn't been willing to go there. But look at architects and engineers. They have got by far the most donations from the public. Scholars for 9/11 Truth never really was a beneficiary. They've had a vast amount of money. They have none, in my opinion, virtually nothing with it. They have put up, drawn attention to Building 7, but as I say, without the narrative, it just doesn't sink in. The American people don't have a reason to open their minds. Why I think your work is so important is you create the narrative context within which the various disparate elements that otherwise would be disjointed in the minds of the American people fit. And I credit you with doing more good to advance 9/11 Truth than the whole of architects and engineers and Judy Wood combined, my personal take.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. It's we also have the 16 years now of being able to witness what have been the effects. And to my mind, the people who carried out 9/11 have succeeded. They have absolutely succeeded in their nefarious plan brilliantly. They've gotten the war. They've gotten the war that they wanted. They've gotten the overthrow of those 7 countries. They've got one country left, I think, maybe Iran, Lebanon, maybe. But they've gotten the regime change they wanted. They have fragmented the Middle East. They've wreaked havoc in half a dozen countries, from North Africa to we've got American troops fighting in places we don't even know, and it's they've got exactly what they want. They got the war on terror going just wonderful. And every time they need a little, spark, and they throw another log on the fire, another sort of event. We're living in such a period of artificial reality that it's hard for people to maintain their sanity.
Yes.
Because it's such a strange matrix, or it's such a strange reality we're living in. It's all artificial.
You're so right, Christopher. My wife's addicted to MSNBC, and so some nights, when she's watching one of her favorite shows, I'm just monitoring, and 90% of what she is hearing and believing is false. It's fabricated, which I know from my own research, because I do a huge amount on current political and developments, foreign affairs, and all that. I'm involved in regular reports on this. I'm responsible for preparing the stories that we discuss every week. I'm putting together, 60 or more stories every week, and having to sift and winnow through all the evidence to sort out what's going on. And I say 90% of what is being told to the American people is blatantly, provably false. So I'm talking about a whole range of issues, all the attacks on Trump, the Mueller investigation, the reported Russian collusion and all that, everything to do with the Middle East. It's all totally a massive pack of lies. To put it very bluntly, it's bullshit. I've never seen so much shoveled in my life.
It's true. It's absolutely true what you say. And it's true when Trump calls it fake news, but it's been fake news for a long time. Anybody who's involved in the 9/11 research knows that. But the investigation, the person who should be investigated here for sure is Mr. Mueller, because he was head of the FBI at the time of the investigation of 9/11, in which the destruction of evidence went on 24/7. Okay, whether Michael Chertoff at the Department of Justice was going to prosecute 9/11 or not is one thing, but destruction of evidence from a crime scene where 2,600 people died is a criminal matter, and destruction of evidence from Shanksville and the Pentagon, this is a criminal matter, and the FBI's conduct in the 9/11 cover-up is something that really needs to be investigated.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And, of course, he not only came in before 9/11, he was there during Sandy Hook. He left after the Boston Marathon. Without drawing you into those subjects, I can tell you they were all sham. I mean, in Boston, my God, the police were on bullhorns calling out, "This is a drill. This is a drill." The Boston Globe was tweeting that a demonstration bomb would be set off during the marathon for the benefit of bomb squad activities. When you peered through the smoke, you saw, yes, bodies missing arms and legs, but there was no blood. They used amputee actors. They used fake blood. It came out of these little orange duffel bags. There were 5 or 6 there when the scene cleared. They even used a studio-quality smoke machine, Christopher. I was so dumbfounded to discover it. I put a photograph of it on the back cover of the book, and Nobody Died in Boston either, as a sequel to the Sandy Hook book, Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, which anyone can download for free. After Amazon banned the book, after it had been up for less than a month and sold nearly 500 copies, I released it for free to the public, and now it's been downloaded over 10 million times, according to those who've been following the figures, which they've also been adjusting rapidly ever since. It's just shameful. All the YouTube. I am certain that interviews you have done that were on YouTube have been taken down, Christopher. I've had so many YouTubes taken down of my own, and they're now, they've devised these routines, these completely contrived algorithms implemented as programs to take down, based upon keywords or phrases, anything that has to do. For crying out loud, Mike Adams did an interview with me, and when the book was banned back in 2015, that was recently taken down, and then he banned his whole site. He had over 7,100 videos, 200,000 subscribers. It was taken out. because of an interview he did with me in 2015 about Sandy Hook. Christopher, the state of the media is appallingly bad. And as you've correctly implied, it began a long time ago, back in the 50s, Operation Mockingbird, so that by 1975, William Colby, then the head of the agency, reported to Congress that the CIA owned everyone of any significance in the media. Which is become worse today, except we have the alternative, the internet, which they're doing their best now to suppress and stomp out as rapidly as they can because too much truth is getting out.
That's right.
Quick question, please.
Yeah, Frank, go ahead.
Hey, did you ever, Christopher, see anything? Because you've been looking into this stuff for so long, you probably would have seen it if there's anything to it, and I couldn't find anything on it. Mueller. Did you ever see anything to indicate he might have had any crypto-Jewish background ancestry from Germany or something?
Oh, no, I hadn't seen anything like that. I had not seen anything like that,
Okay.
No.
I know. I was able to find, I think, Louis Free, I think, was Jewish.
But I know that
anyway.
Mueller had been in the same position that Michael Chertoff was in on 9/11. I think under George Herbert Walker Bush, Mueller had been the assistant attorney general. So they had switched positions. But the person who is responsible for the destruction of evidence, his Mr. Mueller's superior on 9/11 would have been, of course, John Ashcroft and his deputy or his assistant, Michael Chertoff. Michael Chertoff is the son of the Mossad, and he's the one who allowed. He was the one who was supposed to prosecute the crime of 9/11. And in order to do so, he needed the FBI to gather the evidence and to analyze the evidence. But because they treated 9/11 as an act of war, they did no investigation. No investigation.
This is Jim Fetzer with my special guest, Christopher Bolin. We'll continue our conversation right after this break. We'll be right back. Guest today, Christopher Bolin, who's been doing such a brilliant job in getting the truth out about 9/11. Christopher, you were mentioning Michael Chertoff, and of course, just to tie together with some of your opening remarks of our conversation, it was he who released the so-called dancing Israelis, who appear to have been Mossad, or you're suggesting Israeli military agents who returned to Israel. 3 of them, of course, went on Israeli television and acknowledged they'd been there to document the destruction of the World Trade Center. I mean, what could be more obvious and damning? They were, of course, arrested in a white van. They had the residue of explosives, box cutters, passports, money, several other vans, actually, with other Israeli operatives who were planning to blow up the George Washington Bridge, the Holland Tunnel, and so forth. They were going to really try to isolate the island of Manhattan. Were also apprehended. There's been a lot of work done on this, including by veterans today. I just think that Chertoff was playing this crucial role in covering everything up in his role as an assistant to then Attorney General John Ashcroft.
Yeah, of course, because they couldn't do this operation without knowing that it would not be investigated, or the investigation would be in secure hands. And as an Israeli operation, in my opinion, they knew that having this partisan of Israel, Michael Chertoff, in the position, they knew he would be the one who would get the dossier. It would be his portfolio to investigate 9/11, and it went to him directly. He had every decision about destruction of evidence, what have you. And like his cousin wrote the debunking piece that was presented in Popular Mechanics about two years after 9/11, in one of the first attempts to try to debunk the 9/11 truth material, and that was written by Benjamin Chertoff, a cousin of his. So it's like, but Michael Chertoff is an Israeli national. That's important. His mother was an Israeli Mossad agent, one of the first, and she came to America with her husband, rabbi husband, and they had kids in Cleveland, I think it was, and he grew up in Elizabeth, New York, and New Jersey, excuse me. But they could only do an operation like this knowing that the investigation would be in the hands of a friend. And that's essential. That's essential. Otherwise, if there had been a proper investigation of 9/11, in the first 3 months, the whole thing would have been exposed. You know, it's all very obvious. It's like I found it amazingly easy to find these connections when you know what questions to ask, when you know what to look for. Yeah. But you see, that's kind of the rare thing, is that I had the audacity to have a hypothesis that this was an Israeli military operation, a false flag. That was my hypothesis, and that developed very early on because there was clear evidence of Israeli prior knowledge from day one.
Yeah, just to show the tenacity with which they're adhering to a false story. 10 or more of the alleged hijackers turned up alive and well the following day, obviously had not been aboard aircraft that had been crashed deliberately on 9/11. David Ray Griffin makes that his first point in his magisterial work, the 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions. We have a second caller here from the 708 area code. Very glad Frank called in. We have a second caller. Please give us your name and state.
Hello, Professor. Hello, Mr. Bolin. Mr. Bolin, you just said if a proper investigation was done. If a proper investigation was done with many things in our history now, such as gas chambers in World War II, if a proper investigation was done, none of the other garbage that happened after the fact, and a lot of people going to jail just for the crimes they were alleged on them, and death sentences. With that,
and of course, this is Brew from Chicago. Brew from Chicago. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, fighting Chicago traffic, Mr. Bolin. You're not missing nothing here. Nice hot day. I want to give you both a chance to Jim and Bolin, if you plug your website for the audience here, so we can get this in before the end of the segment.
Okay.
So go ahead, Jim.
I think he just wants you to talk about Bollyn.com, BOLLYN.com. And let me especially recommend these two. The movie America, Nation Deceived by Mark Oliver. I actually invited him to join us today as well, because his movie is so marvelous about who is responsible and why. America, Nation Deceived. It's available on Ole Damagard's website. Light on Conspiracies. It's now just been put up on 153news.net. 153news.net. A complimentary video I put together, 9/11, who is responsible and why, can be found on BitChute, BITCHUTE, where Christopher, needless to add, we're having to avoid YouTube because they are taking down so very many. What anything you would like to add, please do so.
Well, yeah, then you got church. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to add that I have written two books in the Solving 9/11 set. One is called The Deception That Changed the World, which is the analysis in a concise format. The larger book, Solving 9/11, the original articles, contains all my articles written in the first 11 years in chronological order. And then I have the most recent book is called The War on Terror, The Plot to Rule the Middle East, which is like the icing on the cake, which explains why all of this was done and where we are today.
Are those available on Amazon.com, Christopher?
Yeah, they're all available on Amazon. On Amazon, you can get all three of them for like $70. But I offer all three books shipped anywhere in the United States and most countries abroad for $50. So you can get all three books for $50.
It's a great deal.
Yeah, it's a good deal.
Just go to Bollyn, BOLLYN.com to order them.
Yeah, they go to Bollyn.com and click on donate, but it's easier if they go to PayPal and just go to make a donation to Bollyn at BollynBooks.com, and then write down they want the set. They want the set of books for $50. Then that's the best way to do it.
Brew, do you have more you want to ask? We do have another caller calling in.
Yes, sir. I want to touch on Mueller since Frank brought it up, but I'll do quick on Chertoff. Chertoff was with DHS, was he not?
Yeah, he was our second head of Homeland Security after Tom Ridge, governor of Pennsylvania.
And then Chertoff profited massively because after he got out of the DHS, he profited off of the metal machine. What are the metal machines in all the airports? The body
scanners we find in all the airports, and they're trying to, they're standing by salivating in the hope that these various stage shootings, such as Las Vegas and Parkland and Santa Fe, is going to lead to their installation in all public institutions, churches, schools, and they'll make hundreds of billions for a non-existent problem. You're spot on, Brew.
Well, Sheriff's Office has got a problem now. They pulled many of these, and many of these body scanners are sitting in warehouses and have been for years, and it's not making them any money. So they've been ramping up these school shootings, and Sheriff's Office is heavily invested in it to make it happen. Right. In fact, and what's good for Sheriff's Office is good for Israel.
Yeah.
So, and that was funny about the sleeper agents. You heard, I was listening today how the FBI or whoever saying how many Iranian sleeper agents in the United States, and we got to beware. Well, what you just said, Mr. Berlin, is the Mossad, Chertov's mother, Mossad agent, and her rabbi husband moved to the United States. They were sleeper agents, and they raised the Mossad child here in the United States. And who were they?
The absurdity
enemies
is,
of the state.
The absurdity is there's all this talk about intervention of foreign nations in our politics, and they talk about Russia and Iran, which have nothing to do with it. They don't mention Israel, which runs the American Congress. We all know. I mean, AIPAC is the most powerful lobby, and they run Congress. I mean, it's sad to say. It's tragic.
They even count the votes. They count the votes. I've watched the caucus in Iowa closely for the last couple decades, and an Israeli company controls the tally of the Iowa caucus through a subsidiary they own in Orlando, Florida, and they've done that for years, so that they're able to manipulate the outcome of the caucus in Iowa, which is very important.
You mean among the very most preliminary sorting processes, Iowa and New Hampshire, and picking candidates for the parties?
Yeah.
Wow, that's very significant.
Yeah,
Brew, you want to throw in another question?
Well, as I've always been saying, this isn't Make America Great Again. This is Take Back America, because we've been plagued with the parasite problem here for pretty much 200 years now.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to get was Frank was saying Mueller. Now, Mueller was appointed to the head of the FBI a week before 9/11. 9/11 happens. Now, you're saying the persons above him were destroying evidence, but wasn't Mueller covering up as well? Because Mueller in his 10-year tenure, was presiding over Sandy Hook and 9/11 and so many other things, that he was there to control the narrative and sweep evidence under the rug. Because again, as you said, if proper investigations were done, like Professor Fetzer does, like you do, like Oli Damagard, they do. These are just citizen investigators, not the power and the money of the government behind them to get out the truth, and not these guys. These guys are great at covering it up, and I'll let you guys go with that. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for the call. Christopher, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that, one of the most awful destructions that went out of evidence was the destruction of human tissue. There were a lot of bodies found and pieces of bodies found even in Pennsylvania, and these bodies, these remains were flown to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, where they have a mortuary. And at the mortuary there, they were being handled by 2 FBI guys. And what I'm getting at is that all of the chain of custody of evidence was in the hands of the FBI. And what they found out is that body tissue, human tissue that could not be identified, was simply being put in a landfill, cremated and put in a landfill. And they were seeding
the site to make it look as though people had died there.
Yeah, it could be, but whatever they picked up, there was a lot. There was a different crime scene out in the forest beyond the crater in Shanksville in Lambertsville. There was an actual debris field in the woods there, and whatever they found there was being destroyed.
Yeah, well, pilots established that Flight 93, which allegedly crashed in Shanksville, was over Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, after it had allegedly crashed. And Flight 175 was over Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, long after it's supposed to have hit the South Tower. I got the FAA registration records, and it turns out the planes used for those 2 flights weren't even deregistered or taken out of service until 29 September 2005. So how can planes, that crashed in 9/11 have still been in the air 4 years later? It's just absurd.
We have a sleight of hand. Sleight of hand.
Oh, wait, area code. Please speak up. Give us your name and state.
Well, I just wanted to take a brief issue with the idea that these body parts may have been put in landfills. We'll say allegedly. I have an alternative theory. I think
this is Paul from California, Chris.
Okay.
What show would not be complete without one of your three main callers? I was glad to see Frank back, so that would make it 4, because most weeks it's Chicago Brew, me, and I forgot the other gentleman's name from Colorado. George, right. So for a while it's been us 3, I think. So anyway, Frank, welcome back. Anyway, I was just going to make a terrible joke about the fact that they probably used whatever body parts they had to make like a matzo ball soup and sell it in a series of Jewish delicatessens. I would imagine that's
a truly tasteless joke.
But listening to the show so far, and I didn't catch all of it. I was out and about, and I kind of came in late, but. What I did catch before you started taking calls and then during the calling period was that everything remains the same throughout not just the decades, but the centuries. I mean, when you think about some of the things that have been written and said, all I could say is it's no wonder what Hitler said was the fact that if you give or allow the Jews a country in Palestine, that more or less that they'll make it their world headquarters for their criminal enterprise. More or less words to that effect. And when you take a look at it's no wonder that they've not been allowed in government positions and media. I mean, there's a long history of this, right? I mean, look at what Russia with the Mayday laws, where they were not allowed in finance and government and in academia, and the same thing. But what's interesting to me is I came across this article just recently on National Vanguard, and once again, I believe he's kind of done, not put an end, but given us another way to look at the rise of Hitler to power, because it's long been promulgated that big business was behind him, correct? So the title of this article is Funding a Movement, German Big Business and the Rise of Hitler. And what it mostly centers on is a book written by this man, published in 1985. It's called German Big Business and the Rise of Hitler. And what he goes into was the fact that only Fritz Thyssen was the main big business supporter of Hitler, and that most other big business, including I.G. Farben, by the way, had little or nothing to do with him. As a matter of fact, he was actually opposed by many of these people because he was an enemy of them. He was a socialist. And he actually, in my opinion, does a pretty good job of getting rid of some of these other main sources, such as Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, because he essentially says that Anthony Sutton was not a true scholar in the way that David Irving was, or relying on original sources, and the way that this gentleman who wrote this book, I'm actually scrolling to find his name here real quick, Turner, there he is, Henry Ashby Turner. 1932 to 2008 is when he died. But what he goes into in this book is how the vast majority of funding of the National Socialist movement came from the people and the participants, and that many of the rallies that we see in the films, there was a charge to go to these things, and that the National Socialists and also the SA had products, and they had stores, and they sold things, and it was just it's very interesting to read that it just might not be the way we were told it was, and that it may have been as close as it could be to an actual grassroots popular movement to dethrone who they knew to be the real power at the time, and guess who is the real power today. So, I mean, that was a sort of a little end to my... Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. No, I'll give you one other thing. So one of the things he does, so apparently there was a book written in 1940, which he calls now, it says it's phony. I'm scrolling here to find it. It says, the title is I Paid Hitler. and it's purported to have written by this businessman here, but he says it was ghostwritten by a Hungarian named Emery Reeves, who, no surprise, was Jewish, and turns out that he was a well-connected Jewish propagandist. So as early as 1941, they were trying to put into the minds of people that Hitler was just a tool of big business and big finance, but it's not really so. And he actually, and I can't get into it because it's a very detailed article, but he actually sort of dissects the other big one, which I have a copy of. I never finished it because it's quite challenging, called The Arms of Krupp by William Manchester, The Rise and Fall of Industrial Dynasty. He said it was a lurid anti-German account of the Krupp family and firm, which catered to popular prejudices at the time, but he essentially puts an end to the fact that, according to him, Krupp and all his cohorts were adamantly anti-National Socialist. And so, anyway, it's just something to think about. The
important thing about this whole thing about World War II is that World War II is still not over. Like the way the United States went into Iraq, and we're still there. 27 years later. Well, we've been there since 2003. Likewise, a lot of people don't appreciate the importance of the fact that Germany does not have a peace treaty with the United States. There's no peace treaty to end World War II. And secondly, Germany has no constitution. They operate under something called the Grundgesetz, which is the basic law, which contains all of the laws, the proclamations, and the occupation law that were imposed on Germany after the war. Those are still in effect. You have a country, you have the most powerful country in the middle of Europe, something like 100 million German-speaking people, still under the boot of the occupation force and the occupation law pertaining to media, to foreign relations, etc. So you have this Germany who's serving. I think Angela Merkel said something like the reason for the state of Germany is to serve Israel. She said that a few years ago. It's like, and they give submarines. They're giving these submarines to Israel, or selling submarines to Israel, which are nuclear capable, which are able to launch nuclear missiles. This is a violation, of course, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but never mind, Israel's not signed to it. So we have a situation where the Zionists come in, usually on the coattails of the U.S. military, into these occupation situations like Germany or Iraq, and they become the overlord of Baghdad or Berlin, what have you.
Right.
And their occupation goes on and on and on. When they talk about Jewish dominance of the whole world, they're not going to do it, waving the Israeli flag. They're doing it. Right. They're doing it, behind closed doors. They're doing it at second level, third level officers. Just like, the CIA on 9/11 was being controlled and run by, Buzzy Krongard. Forget Krongard, that's not his real name. But he's a Jewish guy. He was the operations, he was the executive director of the CIA. He oversaw all day-to-day operations of the CIA. He's the guy that you want to talk to.
And I remember, too, at a conference, probably, I think, 2003, where what's his name, the ex-Green Beret guy who used to go around all the time. I can't think of it right now. Pardon me?
Griggs?
No, it wasn't Griggs. It was had a funny kind of a sounding name. He used to go around and talk about the Federal Reserve and so forth. His name will come to me. Oh, Bogritz, yeah. Yeah, he talked about the fact that Buzz Kronigard, whatever the hell his name is, was one of the ones that had a bunch of call options on one of the airlines. And so, just these people that never fail to come up with devious ways to screw other people over and make money themselves. That's and what you just, when you're talking about the situation in Germany, just reminded me of Ernst Sundell and his, plea, Germany, get off your knees. I have a relative that lives in Germany now for years, in Berlin. He likes it. He's going to stay in Europe. He disdains America. But he confides in me that he goes, as far as he can tell, except for the rare exception of the extreme right wing and the skinheads, he says the average German is beaten. They are a beaten, demoralized people that he has lost a lot of respect for.
Well, they're enslaved. They're enslaved to the deception. The propaganda is extremely intense. I'm speaking speaking in Europe, and here in Sweden, they take ninth graders on the first week of school. They take them to Berlin, and the first place they go is a concentration camp. And it's it's like blood libel. So these Swedish kids grow up thinking that Germans are like bad, they do evil things.
They were trying to save them.
It's this Holocaust thing has become like the protected religion in Europe. It's protected.
Exactly.
You can't you can say what you want about Jesus Christ or any religion, but don't touch that Holocaust.
Right. That's been my favorite line. Interesting that you said that, Christopher, because for probably the better part of more than a decade, I've actually said to people, the ridiculous thing about Holocaust denial is, you can get on your soapbox and deny Jesus Christ. You can deny, the earth is flat or round. You can say anything you want, but you don't deny the Holocaust.
That's right.
Yeah, it's so sad and so ridiculous.
Hey, one real quick, to know who rules over you, discern who you are not allowed to criticize.
Yeah, who said that?
Voltaire.
Well, okay, Voltaire. Right. That's a great quote. I had a quick one, and probably won't be a time to go deeply into it, but I was going to ask your guest, Christopher. So I'm sure you're familiar with, and I just wonder what you thought about, if you had given it any thought, of what they call some of the predictive programs you can look at online. I was kind of both entertained and blown away with episodes of The Simpsons and, like, for example, the Back to the Future movies and so forth, where there can't be any doubt that they're telling you far ahead of time, what it is they're going to do. And to me, I'm just amazed by that. You do have to hand it to these people. They're both their brazenness and their long-term planning. Have you seen these things
we got
I just
about
referred
2
to?
minutes. Please do answer, Paul. But we're getting tight. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, but the most important one that I point to is the Arnon Milchan movie, Medusa Touch, where he flies a 747 into the Pan Am building, a movie made in 1978. That indicates that Israeli military intelligence was planning the operation, the 9/11 operation, already in the 1970s.
Wow.
And then, of course, and then he made that movie with Rupert Murdoch called The Lone Gunman, when a passenger plane is actually remotely hijacked and flown into the World Trade Center.
Right. And, of course, none of us ever see these things, In other words, I used to watch The Simpsons on a regular basis, and when I saw these episodes, it's just one of those things that would just go right over your head as you're watching it, right?
Sure.
But there it was.
Right. Well, thank you.
Anyway, yeah.
Paul,
great show, great guest.
Thanks for calling, Paul. Thanks for calling.
Thanks.
Christopher, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate your coming on. I hope you will come back again, because you have so much to tell, so much to share. And I just want to tell you what a magnificent job I believe you are doing as a representative of 9/11 Truth.
Well, thank you very much, James. It's been a pleasure being with you.
You're doing a great job. I want to recommend everyone check out Christopher's website at Bollyn, BOLLYN.com, and his 3 books. That's quite a great price. It seems to me a terrific package. I do again reiterate, there's this new wonderful movie, America, A Nation Deceived, prominently featuring my guest today, Christopher Bollyn, made by Mark Oliver. You can find it on Ole Domagard's website, but also at 153news.net. I want to thank Frank and Drew and Paul for calling in, and especially my special guest, Christopher Bollyn, and all of you for listening.